you're booking a flight, right? And before you can even pick a seat, a prompt pops up asking if you require a nut-free buffer zone.
Oh, yeah, the airline prompts.
Yeah, or you're packing a lunch for your kid and you walk down the grocery aisle and half of it is just dedicated to like sun butter, pea butter, soy butter, because the actual peanut has been essentially exiled from the modern school cafeteria.
Completely banished.
Right. And we just accept this. The peanut allergy protocol is, it's woven into the fabric of how we navigate shared spaces today. We treat it as just a standard fact of modern biology.
We do, but we shouldn't.
Yeah.
Because it's a relatively new phenomenon in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. And that brings us to the core of what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. Because what if the very medical advice we've all been following for the last, 20 years, the strict avoidance, the hiding of the peanut, the hypervigilance, what if all of that is precisely what engineered this epidemic?
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it forces us to confront a very uncomfortable possibility. We are looking at a scenario where standard, totally well-intentioned pediatric guidelines may have inadvertently hardwired a chronic immune disease into an entire generation of children.
Which is just a staggering thing to consider.
It really is. And we are now moving from this philosophy of passive avoidance to proactive, highly calibrated biological intervention. It's a total overhaul.
And our roadmap for this today is a fascinating June 2026 paper from the New England Journal of Medicine. It's titled Prevention and Treatment of Peanut Allergy. And I want to be clear for you listening, this isn't just some dry update on antihistamines.
Oh, not at all.
It is a complete paradigm shift in immunology. And to understand the sheer scale of how wrong we were, and honestly how terrifyingly narrow the window to get it right actually is, the paper opens with a clinical vignette, and it perfectly illustrates the modern parent's dilemma.
The clinical presentation they chose is incredibly telling. The case involves a 4-month-old infant of East Asian heritage living in the U.S. And this is a baby who, starting at just 6 weeks of age, developed severe atopic dermatitis. So eczema.
Eczema, right, which is so common.
Very common. But we are talking about chronic, heavily inflamed skin barrier dysfunction. It required topical glucocorticoids, and the infant is exclusively breastfed. So the parents are at the pediatrician's office, and they ask a very standard, responsible question. They ask, when and how do we introduce solid foods to prevent allergies?
Right, because they want to do the right thing. And the pediatrician gives them advice that, up until very recently, sounded entirely progressive. They tell the parents, okay, wait until the 6-month weaning mark. And at that point, make sure to include some smooth peanut butter in the baby's diet.
Which sounds totally proactive, right?
Right, because they aren't saying, wait until the child is 3, which used to be the golden rule for years. They're saying 6 months. So the parents follow the instructions, they wait. At 7 months old, they finally introduce a tiny amount of smooth peanut butter.
And the infant's immune system absolutely explodes.
It explodes, hives, acute vomiting.
Yeah, the classic systemic markers of an IgE-mediated anaphylactic response. It's immediate and it's violent. So they do the follow-up diagnostics, and the reality sets in for these parents.
And the numbers are undeniable here.
Right. The skin prick test produces a 6-millimeter wheal diameter. That is a massive localized histamitic reaction for a baby. And the serology shows a peanut-specific IgE level of 1.8 KU per liter. So it is a definitive, hard-coded peanut allergy.
They tried to do everything right. They literally followed the modern 6-month timeline. But the paper drops the absolute hammer on that timeline. It says waiting until 7 months for the specific infant was a catastrophic delay.
A total failure of timing.
Because the biological window had already slammed shut. For a child presenting with early onset severe eczema like that, they needed that oral peanut exposure at 3 to 4 months of age.
3 to 4 months. I mean, think about how short that is.
Yeah.
That is the razor-thin margin between lifelong tolerance and lifelong disease.
It's terrifying as a parent.
Absolutely. And to grasp why that window closes so violently, you have to look at the unique, almost predatory pathophysiology of the peanut allergy itself.
Yeah, let's get into the mechanics of this, because it doesn't act like other allergies.
Exactly. Currently, this condition affects roughly 2% of children in high-income nations. And unlike a milk or egg allergy, where the infant's gastrointestinal and immune systems often mature, and they just kind of develop tolerance naturally over a few years, a peanut allergy is remarkably intractable.
Yeah, the data in the source text shows only, 20 to 32% of kids will outgrow a peanut allergy by age 6 to 10. That means the vast majority are stuck with it.
Stuck with it for life. And nearly 70% of these cases are taking root in the very first year of life.
Before the kid can even walk or form a memory.
Exactly. Before a child can form a single memory, their immune system is already making permanent, life-altering decisions about their environment.
And it's a decision that compounds over time. Untreated peanut allergy doesn't just stagnate, right? It escalates.
Yes, it escalates significantly. The sensitivity to microscopic doses intensifies. The severity of the clinical reactions worsens. I mean, the fatalities we see, and thankfully they are rare, but they do happen, they are overwhelmingly concentrated in young adulthood, not infancy.
Because the immune system is continuously refining its attack over the years.
Right. It's practicing.
And the mechanics of that escalation are what completely threw me when I was reading the data on Figure 1 in the paper. Because I look at something like, say, a tetanus vaccine.
Okay, good comparison.
Right, you get the shot, your immune system learns the pathogen, it produces antibodies. But eventually, if it doesn't see tetanus for a decade, it forgets. The antibody titers wane, you need a booster.
Right, the immune system stands down.
Or even look at celiac disease. You have a patient with a severe hypersensitivity to dietary gluten. If they entirely eliminate gluten from their diet, their tissue transglutaminase IgA levels drop. The immune system puts its weapons down because the enemy is gone.
Which is the standard logical biological conservation of energy. I mean, the immune system shouldn't waste precious metabolic resources fighting a ghost.
Exactly. But then Figure 1 tracks the biomarker changes in these major cohorts, like the LEAP, LEAP-ON, and LEAP Trio trials. It looks at children who are practicing strict dietary avoidance. They're not consuming a single milligram of peanut protein.
Tribal avoidance.
And yet their ERA H2-specific IgE levels, which are the antibodies specifically targeting the most allergenic protein in the peanut, they are just skyrocketing.
They're going off the charts. It makes no sense biologically.
None. The median change in their skin prick wheal size goes from 0 at baseline to 3 millimeters at 12 months to 6 millimeters at 30 months, and then it hits 10 millimeters by 60 months. The physical reactivity is multiplying in a total vacuum of exposure.
It's escalating in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating here is, more critically, the fundamental architecture of the immune response is mutating while this is happening.
Yes, this is the part we really need to unpack.
The paper details this incredible, terrifying shift in what the antibodies are actually targeting over time. In a very young infant, so before roughly 2.5 years of age, the IgE antibodies are primarily recognizing what we call conformational epitopes.
Okay, conformational epitopes. Let's play with an analogy here because I think the shift from conformational to linear is the key to understanding everything.
Go for it.
Think of the infant immune system like an early-stage AI facial recognition software. At first, it's looking for those conformational epitopes, meaning it recognizes the 3D shape of the protein. It recognizes the face of the peanut protein when it's perfectly folded together.
Right, the macro structure.
Exactly. But if you were to cook that protein or expose it to stomach acid, it denatures. The protein unfolds, the face is distorted, and the early AI might not recognize it anymore.
Because that 3D structure is highly dependent on environmental conditions. It's fragile. It breaks down easily under heat or acid.
Right. But as the child approaches 2.5 years of age, the immune system, which has been sitting in the dark, never seeing a peanut, it is obsessively upgrading its software. It stops looking at the 3D face and it starts targeting linear epitopes.
It zooms in.
It learns to read the underlying sequence of the amino acids. It goes from recognizing a face to recognizing the fundamental DNA sequence, essentially. So now it doesn't matter if you cook the peanut, roast it, digest it, or unfold it. The linear sequence is indestructible. The immune system will find it and attack it.
That analogy perfectly captures the clinical severity of this shift. IgE directed at linear epitopes is the primary biomarker strongly associated with persistent, lifelong, severe food allergy.
It's locked in.
The immune system graduates from a superficial recognition to an intrinsic molecular lockdown. It cannot be fooled anymore.
Which totally answers the massive question of the ticking clock. If that software upgrade happens at 2.5 years old, if the immune system shifts to linear targeting, the concrete has set.
Yes, the window closes.
You have to intervene before that shift occurs if you want any chance of the body accepting the peanut as food.
Exactly. And that realization forces us to ask an even deeper question. Because if an infant isn't eating peanuts, where is the initial sensitization happening? How does the immune system first decide that a peanut is a lethal pathogen if it's never seen one in the gut?
This is where the dual allergen exposure hypothesis comes in. And honestly, it is arguably the most important conceptual leap in modern allergy research.
It completely changed the field.
It essentially pits the skin against the stomach. We know the risk factors for allergy, right? We have genetics, being male, and heavily early onset atopic dermatitis, which is exactly what our 4-month-old in the case Vignette had.
Right. And the hypothesis articulates a very clear dichotomy between these two organs. Oral exposure, so introducing a protein through the gastrointestinal tract, promotes antigen tolerance.
Because the gut is meant to process food.
Exactly. The gut is this massive, highly specialized immune organ designed to encounter foreign proteins, break them down, and basically signal to the systemic immune system, hey, this is nutrition, do not attack.
It's the front door. The security guard at the front door checks the ID, sees it's a food protein, and lets it into the club safely. But the skin is an entirely different security apparatus.
The cutaneous immune system is designed solely to repel invaders. It's a fortress wall. So when you have an infant with eczema, you have a compromised epidermal barrier.
You have microscopic fissures.
Yes, and the paper notes this is often compounded by skin colonization of Staphylococcus aureus, a bacteria which further degrades the barrier function and stokes localized inflammation.
So the fortress wall has a broken window. And if environmental peanut protein like peanut dust from the kitchen, residue on an older sibling's hands, trace amounts on a playmat, if that sneaks through the broken window of the eczematous skin, the skin sentinels panic.
They absolutely panic. They don't see food. They see a foreign protein breaching a compromised perimeter, and they trigger a massive systemic IgE alarm. They permanently ban the peanut.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, and honestly a bit tragic. The data supporting this transcutaneous sensitization is super sobering.
It is. What's fascinating here is the prospective cohort study by Fox et al. That the source references. They observed infants with severe atopic dermatitis, and parents, naturally desperate to soothe their infant's skin, were applying frequent emollients and moisturizers.
Trying to fix the broken window.
Right. But tragically, some of those over-the-counter preparations contained Araki's oil, peanut oil.
The parents were literally massaging the allergen directly into the broken window.
Exactly. The study found that infants treated with these peanut oil-containing emollients in their first 6 months of life had a vastly increased risk of developing a peanut allergy. Yeah. And furthermore, the broader environmental exposure data from that same research group showed that simply existing in a household with high ambient peanut consumption increased allergy risk in these atopic kids.
Because there's peanut dust in the air.
Yes. But crucially, that was only true if the child was not simultaneously eating peanuts.
Because the dust is continuously breaching the skin barrier, setting off the alarms, but the gut is completely silent. There is no oral tolerance being generated to override the skin's panic.
Precisely. But here's a critical leverage point. The data show that if those same high-risk infants were introduced to peanuts orally early in that first year of life, it dramatically attenuated the environmental risk.
The gut security guard overruled the skin security guard.
Exactly. The oral tolerance generated by the gut was powerful enough to override the alarm bells ringing in the skin.
But wait, logically, if the broken skin is the primary vector of the disease, my instinct as a parent, or even a doctor, would be to just aggressively fix the skin. I mean, why are we forcing 4-month-olds to eat peanut butter if we could just aggressively treat the eczema, heal the broken window, keep the peanut outside, problem solved, right?
It's a completely logical question, and the medical community explored that exact logic. The paper details the PACEI trial. That's the prevention of allergy via cutaneous intervention.
Okay, so they tested this.
They did. Researchers hypothesized that if they aggressively restored the skin barrier, they could halt the sensitization entirely. So they took infants within the first 12 weeks of life and applied an intensive intervention. Heavy emollients combined with potent topical glucocorticoids.
Throwing the absolute kitchen sink at the eczema, did it work?
Immunologically, it showed some promise. It yielded a 25% relative reduction in egg allergy by 1 year age. But the physiological cost was simply unacceptable.
What happened?
Well, you are applying potent steroids to a massive surface area of a developing infant. The trial recorded significant, measurable decreases in the infant's weight gain and linear growth.
Wait, really? That is a devastating trade-off. You are effectively stunting an infant's physical development just to slightly reduce the odds of a food allergy.
Exactly. The cure was worse than the disease in that regard.
And what if you remove the steroids and just use the moisturizers, just the emollients?
Trials using emollients alone have completely failed to show any prevention of food allergy. We simply cannot safely or effectively seal the broken window tight enough to prevent sensitization. The environmental dust is too pervasive, and the skin barrier is too complex.
So fixing the skin is a dead end.
It is a dead end for primary prevention. We are forced to use the front door. We have to build oral tolerance.
Which brings us to the absolute revolution in pediatric guidelines, because for listeners who are raising kids in the early 2000s or even the 2010s, the whiplash here is intense.
Oh, it's a total reversal.
The guidelines from the American Academy of Pediatrics used to be draconian. Absolutely no peanuts until age 3. In the UK, it was strict avoidance for the first year. We were deliberately holding children back from oral tolerance right as their immune systems were upgrading their software to lock in on those linear epitopes.
We were inadvertently engineering the perfect storm for sensitization. We handed the immune system the exact environment it needed to form a lifelong allergy.
It's so wild to think about. The current guidelines represent a 180-degree reversal. Today, in the US and Europe, the mandate is to introduce peanuts at 4 to 6 months of age for at-risk infants and roughly 6 months for the general population.
Right. And medical establishments do not reverse decades of entrenched policy without overwhelming, irrefutable data.
They really don't. And we need to talk about that data. We need to talk about the LA trial, because Table 1 in this paper outlines what is arguably one of the most successful dietary interventions in modern medical history.
The LA pre-trial learning early about peanut allergy, it fundamentally rewrote the textbooks.
How did they set it up?
They enrolled 640 infants who were categorized as high risk, meaning they already presented with severe eczema, egg allergy, or both. And they randomized them into 2 arms. One group adhered to the traditional advice, strict peanut avoidance.
The standard of care at the time.
Right. And the other group was tasked with early consumption. Their target was 6 grams of peanut protein per week.
Okay, 6 grams of protein. Logistically, for people wondering what that looks like, we're talking about roughly 2 heavily heaped teaspoons of peanut butter. And you thin it out with breast milk or formula so the infant doesn't choke, obviously. Administered over, say, 3 or 4 meals a week. It is a really minor dietary addition.
A minor addition with monumental consequences. They followed these children to 5 years of age. In the strict avoidance group, the prevalence of peanut allergy was 17%.
Wow.
But in the early consumption group, it was 3%.
An 81% relative reduction in clinical trial terms, an 81% reduction in disease incidence from a low-cost, non-pharmacological dietary intervention is staggering.
It's practically unheard of. It completely validates the gut tolerance theory.
And they proved it lasted too, right? Because they followed up on these kids.
They did. The researchers knew they had to test the durability of this tolerance, because if they stopped eating peanuts, would the allergy come back?
Yeah.
So the follow-up LEP on trial instructed the early consumption cohort to completely cease eating peanuts for a full year from age 5 to 6.
That's a huge test of the system.
Right. If the tolerance was fragile, a year of avoidance would cause the allergy to reemerge. But it didn't. The clinical protection remained robust.
That's amazing.
And a further extension study followed them into adolescence, where they ate peanuts entirely ad libitum, just normally, whenever they wanted, and the protection endured.
It proves that if you catch the immune system in that vital 4 to 6 month window, you can permanently program it for peace.
Exactly.
And this wasn't just for high-risk kids. The ET trial and the Preventadol trial, which the paper also covers, they replicated these benefits across general populations and infants with mild eczema. The data is practically screaming at us to feed babies peanuts.
Screaming at us.
But this is where the paper highlights a very grim reality in Figure 2, the mathematical modeling of the delay penalty.
Yes, the delay penalty. Figure 2 charts the relative reduction in the burden of peanut allergy based on the exact month of introduction, stratified by eczema severity. And the slope of those lines is brutal.
Walk us through it.
The efficacy of the intervention degrades with every single month of delay. If a parent of an infant with severe eczema introduces peanut protein at 3 months, the model shows roughly a 65% relative reduction in allergy risk.
Huge.
But if they hesitate, if they wait until 6 months, that reduction drops to about 40%. Wait until 9 months, and it plummets to barely 20%.
The biological window does not gently close, it slams shut. Going back to our case vignette at the start of the deep dive, that delay from 4 months to 7 months wasn't just a minor scheduling issue. It was the absolute loss of the therapeutic window.
Exactly.
So, okay, if the math is this unforgiving, why isn't everyone doing it? Why is there such a massive barrier to widespread implementation? Why are parents still terrified? And why are some pediatricians still dragging their feet?
Well, implementation science is often much harder than bench science. You are fighting entrenched social beliefs and profound parental fear. I mean, think about it. Handing a parent a jar of peanut butter and telling them to feed it to their 4-month-old infant with severe eczema, it feels entirely counterintuitive.
It feels reckless, especially when society has spent 20 years treating the peanut like biological warfare. You walk onto a plane and it's announced like a bomb threat.
Right. But beyond just parental anxiety, there is a massive institutional conflict happening at the highest levels of global health. The text explicitly calls out the World Health Organization guidelines.
This is the part that really complicates things.
This is the systemic friction point. Introducing solid allergenic foods at 4-6 months is in direct, irreconcilable conflict with the WHO mandate. The WHO strongly advocates for exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life.
And we have to be fair to the WHO here. That guideline wasn't written to cause food allergies. It was written to save lives.
Absolutely. The WHO guidelines are calibrated for a global population. In low and middle income countries, exclusive breastfeeding is the primary bulwark against infant mortality driven by infectious diseases.
Right.
It protects against waterborne pathogens, diarrheal diseases, and respiratory infections in places where clean water and sanitation might be compromised.
But the paper points out the devastating irony of applying a global infectious disease protocol to a high-income environment. In places like the US or the UK, the risk of an infant dying from a waterborne diarrheal disease is incredibly low.
Very low.
But the risk of developing a chronic, life-altering food allergy is skyrocketing.
It is the ultimate epidemiological mismatch. By strictly adhering to the WHO 6-month exclusive breastfeeding rule in high-income nations, we are effectively starving the infant gut of the early allergenic exposure it requires to build tolerance.
We are applying a protocol designed to prevent acute infectious death. And in doing so, we are inadvertently fueling an epidemic of chronic immune hypersensitivity.
It places pediatricians and parents in an impossible position. You are told breast is best exclusively for 6 months. But wait too long, and your child's immune system locks in a lifelong peanut allergy.
And who pays the heaviest price for this delay? This brings us to the racial disparities in the data, and honestly, these numbers stopped me in my tracks.
They are very stark. The population modeling in high-income nations reveals a profound, deeply concerning stratification of risk based on race. Let's look at the baseline prevalence of peanut allergy. Among white infants, the prevalence sits at 5.5%.
Which is high. I mean, 1 in 20 kids is a lot. But look at the other groups.
Among black infants, the prevalence jumps to 14.6%. For mixed-race infants, it is 14.7%. And for Asian infants, it reaches a staggering 29.2%.
Nearly 1 in 3 Asian infants in this specific data modeling has a peanut allergy, compared to 1 in 20 white infants. That is a public health crisis hidden inside of an epidemic.
It really is. And the biological timing makes it even worse. The data indicates that peanut allergy develops earlier in the first year of life in non-white infants.
Which means their delay penalty is severely accelerated. On those mathematical models from Figure 2, the line for non-white infants plummets drastically faster. A delay of just a few weeks in introducing peanuts is exponentially more penalizing for the immune system of a black or Asian infant compared to a white infant.
The obvious question is mechanically, biologically, why? Why is an Asian infant in the U.S. reacting so much earlier and so much more severely than a white infant?
Right. What is driving this?
The paper designates this as a major area of uncertainty, meaning we lack definitive clinical proof right now, but the underlying theories driving current research are fascinating. We have to look at the intersection of genetics, environment, and migration.
Let's theorize on the genetic and environmental side. If the dual allergen exposure hypothesis hinges on the skin barrier being the broken window, are there differences in skin barrier integrity across these populations?
That is a primary avenue of investigation. We know that mutations in the filaggrin gene, which is crucial for maintaining the structural integrity of the stratum corneum, the outermost layer of the skin, those mutations vary significantly across different ancestral populations.
Okay, so if an infant has a genetic predisposition to a more permeable skin barrier, transcutaneous sensitization from environmental peanut dust is going to happen much faster and much earlier.
Exactly. The broken window is inherently wider from birth.
What about the migration aspect? Because that was mentioned too. You take a family with East Asian heritage and they migrate to a Western environment. How does that change the internal environment, the gut?
The microbiome is likely a massive player here. The infant gut microbiome is heavily influenced by maternal diet, environmental exposures, and regional flora. When populations migrate to high-income, highly sanitized Western nations, they experience a rapid shift in diet and environmental microbes.
Which can lead to dysbiosis.
Right, an imbalance in the gut bacteria.
And if the gut bacteria are out of balance, the gut's security guard is compromised. It can't effectively signal tolerance when the oral peanut finally arrives.
Precisely. You combine a potentially more permeable skin barrier with a Western-shifted microbiome that is struggling to generate regulatory T cells, and you have a biological environment primed for massive, rapid allergic sensitization.
I just think about the incredible stress this places on non-white families. You have an infant whose allergy might be cementing at 3 months old. You are fighting against older cultural advice from your extended family to delay solid foods.
And you're fighting against standard WHO guidelines pushed by a medical system that hasn't fully integrated this new urgency.
Exactly. Every single week you wait, the penalty multiplies. It is an agonizing, high-stakes gauntlet, and it underscores why early introduction has to become a universal aggressive default in pediatric care.
It cannot be left to chance or parental hypervigilance. The system itself must adapt to the biology.
But all of this, the 4 to 6 month window, the 6 grams a week, this is primary prevention. It is for the infants who haven't crossed the threshold yet. We have to pivot to the millions of kids, teenagers, and adults who already have the allergy.
The ones whose immune systems have already locked onto those indestructible linear epitopes.
Right. For decades, the only advice was tertiary prevention. Strict avoidance, read every label, and carry an EpiPen everywhere.
Tertiary prevention is essentially living in a state of perpetual defense. You accept the disease and try to mitigate the catastrophic outcomes. But the landscape is finally shifting toward active intervention. We're trying to actively modulate the established immune response, primarily through immunotherapy and biologics.
Let's start with oral immunotherapy, or OIT. Conceptually, this is exposure therapy for the immune system, right?
Yes. OIT involves the daily, rigorously controlled oral administration of escalating doses of peanut protein in a patient with a confirmed allergy. You start with a subthreshold dose micrograms, and over months or years, you systematically force the immune system to tolerate increasing amounts.
I imagine the clinical trials for this are highly nerve-wracking. How well does it actually work in older kids?
The data from the Palisade trial provides a very clear picture. They enrolled 551 patients, predominantly aged 4 to 17 years old. The active treatment group received a maintenance dose of 300 milligrams of peanut protein daily.
For context for you listening, 300 milligrams is roughly one single peanut kernel.
Correct. After the maintenance phase, they performed a double-blind, placebo-controlled food challenge. In the placebo group, only 4% could tolerate a single dose of 600 milligrams of peanut protein without dose-limiting symptoms.
And in the OIT group,
67.2% tolerated the 600 milligram dose.
600 milligrams, about 2.5 peanuts. So to be clear, this is not a cure. A teenager on OIT cannot go to a party and casually eat a Reese's cup. But if they eat a brownie that was cross-contaminated on a bakery cutting board, they won't go into anaphylactic shock.
That is the precise clinical goal: bite-proof protection. It provides a life-altering safety net against accidental exposure. However, the researchers wanted to know if a true cure was possible. Could they achieve clinical remission?
Meaning the patient could stop the daily dosing for months and still maintain the tolerance.
Right. And this goes right back to the age of the patient. The IMPACT-3 trial looked at toddlers, 1 to 3 years old.
Right around that 2.5-year software upgrade window.
The IMPACT trial results perfectly mirror our earlier discussion about that shift. They put these toddlers through OIT, achieved desensitization, and then completely stopped the therapy for 6 months. Then they challenged them with 5,000 milligrams of peanut protein.
That is a massive dose.
It is. The remission rates were entirely age-dependent. If the child commenced OIT before they were 24 months old, 71% achieved sustained clinical remission.
71% essentially cured. Because their immune systems were still targeting the conformational epitopes. They hadn't locked in the linear DNA sequence yet.
The biological plasticity was still there. But if the therapy started just slightly later, between 24 and 36 months of age, that remission rate plummeted to 35%. If they started after 36 months, only 19% achieved remission.
Once the immune system matures and shifts its targeting strategy, reversing the allergy becomes exponentially more difficult.
It really does. And we have to acknowledge, OIT is not a gentle process.
No, I mean, you are literally feeding a patient the exact substance that their body believes is a lethal poison. The side effect profile has to be intense.
It is a grueling regimen. In the IMPACT trial with toddlers, 98% of the participants experienced at least one dose-related allergic reaction.
Yeah.
While most were mild to moderate, severe symptoms did occur in about 5%.
Which is terrifying for a parent to oversee at home.
And as patients get older, the risks compound. A 2019 systemic review of OIT in older children and adults revealed that compared to strict avoidance, OIT actually increased the overall risks of anaphylaxis and the need for epinephrine rescue.
So you are inducing the very emergency you are trying to prevent. And there is a specific chronic complication mentioned in the literature regarding OIT, eosinophilic esophagitis, or EOE. What exactly is happening there?
EOE is a chronic allergic inflammatory disease of the esophagus. When you are swallowing a daily dose of an allergen, the immune system can trigger a massive influx of eosinophils, which is a type of white blood cell, into the esophageal tissue.
And what do?
These cells release toxic granules that cause intense inflammation, tissue remodeling, and severe dysphagia, meaning difficulty swallowing. Food can literally get impacted in the esophagus.
That sounds horrific.
It is incredibly painful and requires stopping the OIT and initiating completely different treatments, like swallowed topical steroids. EOE occurs in about 2 to 3% of patients undergoing oral immunotherapy.
It's a massive physiological toll. You are forcing the immune system through a boot camp, and some patients simply break down.
Which is exactly why researchers are looking at alternative delivery methods, like epicutaneous immunotherapy, or EPAT. This is the patch.
But I have to push back here because we spent half of this deep dive establishing that putting peanut protein on the skin, the broken window, is exactly what causes the allergy in the first place. How on earth does a peanut skin patch cure it?
It is a brilliant physiological paradox. The fundamental difference lies in the delivery mechanism and the state of the skin barrier. The transcutaneous sensitization we discussed earlier happens when massive, uncontrolled amounts of environmental peanut dust enter through broken, eczematous skin, triggering systemic inflammation.
Right.
The Ipaiki patch, conversely, uses a highly engineered, occlusive chamber applied to intact, healthy skin.
Oh, so it's not a broken window.
Exactly. Furthermore, the dose is microscopic. We are talking microgram quantities of freeze-dried protein. That is far below the threshold required to trigger systemic anaphylaxis.
So what's the goal if the dose is that small?
The goal is to deliver just enough antigen to gently engage the Langerhans cells, which are the specialized antigen-presenting cells in the epidermis, without triggering the mast cells that cause anaphylaxis. These Langerhans cells then migrate to the lymph nodes and slowly generate regulatory T cells, promoting tolerance.
Wow. You are bypassing the systemic alarm system and quietly slipping the blueprint to the regulatory cells.
Yeah.
Does it work?
The EPITOPE trial investigated this in toddlers aged 1 to 3. The safety profile was excellent. Very few systemic side effects, though high rates of localized skin irritation at the patch site, which is expected.
Right, because it's still a batch.
After 12 months, 67% of the patch group were desensitized, compared to 34% on placebo. And in an extension study, after 24 months of continuous daily patch wear, 84% met the criteria for a clinical response.
But that is incredibly promising. And what about sublingual immunotherapy, SLIT, liquid drops under the tongue?
Similar principle. The mucosa under the tongue is rich in tolerogenic dendritic cells. A recent study of 50 kids with a median age of 2.5 years showed that after 36 months of daily 4 milligram doses, 79% were desensitized. And again, mirroring OIT, the younger the child at initiation, the higher the likelihood of a robust response.
But just to be clear for anyone listening, neither the EPITAPE patch nor the SLIT drops are currently FDA approved for peanut allergy. They remain experimental, which leaves us with the heavy artillery, biologics.
Biologics represent the cutting edge of pharmacological intervention. They don't just expose the immune system to the allergen, they actively suppress the immune system's weapons.
How so?
Well, the test specifically focuses on a monoclonal antibody called omalizumab. It recently gained FDA approval based on the OutMat TCH trial for patients 1 year and older with multiple food allergies.
How does a monoclonal antibody work against a peanut?
Omalizumab specifically targets and binds to free, circulating IgE antibodies in the bloodstream.
The very antibodies that are looking for the peanut protein.
Exactly. Before the IgE can attach to the mast cells and trigger the explosive release of histamine, the biologic drug binds to the IgE and neutralizes it. It acts as a molecular sponge, mopping up the weapons before they can be fired.
That is brilliant. And the clinical results?
Highly effective for building a threshold. In the Outback TCH trial, 67% of participants on omalizumab were able to tolerate over 600 milligrams of peanut protein during a food challenge, compared to a mere 7% on the placebo.
Which is that bite-proof threshold we talked about earlier.
Right. And crucially, because you aren't feeding the patient the allergen daily, you avoid the grueling side effects of OIT. You don't have to restrict exercise or hot showers for 2 hours after a dose to prevent a reaction. You just get the injection.
But the mechanism you just described, it's a sponge.
Yeah.
It mops up the circulating IgE. It doesn't stop the immune system from producing the IgE. So is it actually a cure?
It is not a cure. This raises an important question. It's a highly effective passive shield. Omalizumab does not induce disease-modifying oral tolerance. It does not teach the underlying T cells to accept the peanut.
So it's temporary.
Completely.
Yeah.
Therefore, the protection is entirely dependent on continuous long-term administration of the drug. The biological half-life of the drug dictates your safety.
Wow.
The absolute moment you discontinue the biologic, the free IgE levels rebound, the mast cells are rearmed, and the patient is completely vulnerable to anaphylaxis once again.
Okay, let's synthesize this entire treatment landscape because it's vital. Oral immunotherapy is like sending an allergic immune system to a brutal, years-long boot camp. It actively changes the biology, it builds real endurance, but it is exhausting. It requires daily, agonizing maintenance, and the patient might suffer severe injuries like anaphylaxis or EOE along the way.
That's a fair assessment.
And biologics, on the other hand, are like hiring a massive, incredibly expensive, heavily armed bodyguard. It is highly effective. You don't have to do the grueling work yourself. But the absolute second you stop paying that bodyguard, they walk away, and you are instantly exposed to the assassins you never actually defeated.
That is an excellent, clear-eyed assessment of where we stand clinically in 2026. We possess highly effective tools to mitigate risk, but we are still chasing the definitive cure for established disease.
So what's next?
The frontier of research right now is attempting to combine these modalities. The ongoing Combine trial is testing exactly that hypothesis. Can we use the biologic bodyguard to shield the patient from the severe side effects of OIT, allowing us to push them through the boot camp safely with multiple allergens to ultimately achieve a state of permanent treatment-independent tolerance?
That would be the holy grail. We've traversed an immense amount of complex biology today. If you take nothing else away from this deep dive, let it be this. The era of passive avoidance is over.
It is entirely over.
The biological window to prevent a peanut allergy is shockingly narrow. It peaks at 4 to 6 months of age. Delaying the introduction of peanut protein is an active, measurable risk, particularly for infants with severe eczema, and profoundly so for non-white infants who face a deeply accelerated disease timeline.
The science is definitive. We must introduce roughly 2 grams of peanut protein weekly for low-risk infants and 4 to 6 grams for high-risk infants.
We are fundamentally rewriting the relationship between the developing human immune system and the environment.
We are learning that tolerance is an active process that must be deliberately cultivated, not assumed.
I want to leave you with a thought to mull over as you navigate the rest of your week. We have just dissected how the strict, fearful avoidance of a completely benign protein during a critical developmental window actually engineered a chronic, potentially lethal immune disease in an entire generation of children. We isolated them, and it made them fragile.
This is a sobering realization.
As our modern world becomes increasingly sanitized, as our environments become more sterile, and as so many of our cultural instincts push us toward hyper-protecting ourselves and our children from messy, natural exposures, you have to wonder, what other modern avoidance behaviors are we currently practicing that are quietly, inadvertently destroying our biological resilience?
The human immune system demands an education, and isolation is a terrible teacher.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the peanut allergy paradigm. Until next time, stay curious.